important and why is it great? Why do we need to talk about it? Well, the Enneagram on a basic level is a personality profiling tool. It's a lot like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or the StrengthsFinder. But beyond all of those, the Enneagram actually is a tool that you can use to ascertain not only behaviors that you're doing externally, but to help you uncover your key motivations, the reasons why you do what you do or that you act the way you do. And because of that, I find it to be extremely, extremely helpful. Now, some say that the Enneagram is actually a bit of an ancient tool. The ancient Greeks had this idea that human beings manifested their personalities in 9 basic types. And some say that this concept is actually even older than that. But through the years, it has been distilled and taught by many spiritual teachers. Until now, it's become pretty widely known and vastly popular. And the Enneagram, the word actually means 9-sided shape, like Ennea, 9, and gram for shape. And there's a shape that goes with it, and it looks like this. And so, like I said, there's this idea that humans can be divided into 9 basic personality types. And when you place them in a circle like this, with these zigzaggy lines going across, you get the main Enneagram symbol. Now, don't let this scare you. There's nothing harmful, occultish, or anything like that about the Enneagram. It's actually very, very helpful and merges well with a Christian tradition or spiritual tradition. But the 9 basic profiles or personality types interact with each other. And here's another thing I love about the Enneagram. And that's, unlike some of the other personality tests that I mentioned before, the Enneagram is not actually about pigeonholing you into this is who you are. You're this number and that's it. It's actually about helping you understand yourself and then helping you understand others so that you can have better, more healthy relationships. But not only that, the Enneagram helps you to actually take on the characteristics of other numbers so that you can, in a sense, be all things to all people, to actually put on the traits of somebody else to be for them what they need in a given moment. And I'll give you an example. So I am a 9, and 9s are peacemakers. We're conflict averse. We don't really like to get in fights because a conflict rubs up against our basic fear as a 9. Again, going back to motivations, this is what drives me, is I have a basic fear of being lost or of losing connection with a relationship. I don't want to be isolated. I want to have deep, meaningful relationships, and I am afraid of losing those. So I don't want conflict because one wrong move could end the relationship. Now, an 8, on the other hand, thrives on conflict and actually sees conflict as a way to suss out if somebody's being authentic or honest in their communication. And so one of my coworkers is an 8, and we had shared several meetings together, and I learned over the course of time that as an 8, he actually respects if I'm able to stand up for myself and actually push back from time to time. And so knowing that, I was actually able to not only interpret his conflict as not a threat and it's not personal, but then I was actually able to give him to push back from time to time, to be authentic. If I disagreed, to not just say, okay, fine, do whatever you want to do because let's avoid conflict. I was able to actually say, you know what, I disagree, and here's why, and let me push back. And out of that became a really healthy dynamic. I was actually able to, through understanding the Enneagram, put on an understanding of his type and act towards him in a way that I knew he would respect and would respond well to. And it helped me to not feel threatened if I ever sensed conflict coming from him because I knew it wasn't personal. So already right there, through one example, you can see how powerful this tool is. So that's the first thing I think is why the Enneagram is great, is it actually is less about learning yourself. It's a less selfish motivation, and it's about learning how to interact with others and cultivate true, deep, and healthy relationships. Here's another thing I think that is great about the Enneagram. And through this one, I'll explain a little bit more about how it works. And I love, point 2 would be that it's complicated. Because human beings are complicated. We're very complex. And they say that the Enneagram numbers can be understood like colors. So as a 9, let's say 9s are like blue. Well, not every person who's a 9 is going to be the same shade of blue. I might be a darker blue than somebody else who's a 9. It allows for that complexity and variance within the Enneagram, and it does that through a few things. And the first would be what are called wings. Now, the wings of an Enneagram type are the numbers to either side of the main number. And so as a 9, I can have an 8 wing or a 1 wing. And you can imagine even like a person standing and their wings like branching off, right? So someone that's a 9 with an 8 wing will be a very interesting 9 because they would take on some of the qualities of that conflict and the domineering personality, confident challenger personality of the 8, while still having a conflict averse major side of them. But I actually have a 1 wing, and what that brings out in me is this idea that the 1 is the reformer, and so that there is a best way to do something. So I'm a 9, and I typically will let people do what they want and choose. I'll always let somebody else choose. But with my 1 wing, I'll actually think that there's a best way to do it. I'll want to reform any situation I'm in, but I'm usually keeping that to myself as a 9 because I don't want to stir the pot. So what I'm learning to do to be healthier is actually let my 1 wing out a little bit. When I do have a strong opinion, I've learned that I need to share it. And so my blue hue actually skews this direction a little bit. But then there's these zigzaggy lines. What does that mean? Well, the 9 is connected with 6 and with 3. And that brings up something that's called integration or disintegration. And the goal of being a healthy, whole human being is to be integrated, fully integrated with yourself, right? And when you're on the path of integration, you can also use a synonym growth. When you're growing, when you're healthy, when you're integrated and whole, a 9 moves towards 3. And a 3 is an achiever. So 9s that are maybe a little lazy, apathetic, and they're just too wishy-washy to really go in a direction. If they start getting healthy and integrated, they become like a 3 and start achieving and making goals and achieving goals. And 3s are a lot like Leslie Knope for any Parks and Rec fans out there. And so that's healthy for a 9. But when 9 is in disintegration, or a synonym could be stress, when a 9 is stressed out, when they're disintegrated, when they're not healthy, a 9 goes to 6. And 6s can tend to be full of anxiety. They need a lot of stability, and they're called the loyalist. So 9s that are, maybe a little wishy-washy, a little lazy, can actually begin to worry and to continue to isolate themselves more and more and get in this anxiety-ridden spiral of, I haven't been around much, so now they must hate me, so I'm not going to come around anymore. And I think just by showing up, I'm going to cause too much conflict. And we just get in our own heads and start to spiral. And so that's what these lines are. Each number has a spot they go to in health and in stress. And again, complexity. That's what I love about it. That's why it's great, is that it's as complex as we are as people. So the third thing I would say that why the Enneagram is great is actually, ironically, because it's so simple. I just talked about how it's so complex. And it is. It has all this depth of complexity, but it's also very simple in its verbiage. And the reason it's so great is because in conversation, it's very easy to just say a number instead of a string of letters or any of these other words that go along with other personality types. and tests, you can just say, man, my one wing is really coming out right now. Or you can say, man, the 9 in me doesn't want to have that hard conversation. It has such a simple shorthand. Once you understand how it works for your number and the number of others around you in relationship, maybe your significant other, you can then develop this shorthand in those relationships. And it's even helpful in the workplace. I know of some offices that put your Enneagram number next to your nameplate. So when you're approaching somebody's office, you see this is their office. Oh, they're a 3. Well, I know this then about them, so perhaps I need to approach them in a different way than I was going to now that I understand their number. Or you sitting in a meeting and you know their number and you're saying, I know you're an 8. The 9 in me, doesn't want to say this, but I know you'll hear it well. We just had this really simple shorthand to kind of explain a lot more. And so that simplicity of explanation is also why the Enneagram is so great. Well, I've talked a lot about this now at this point. Most of you have probably already clicked away, but for the few of you that are still here, I just want to thank you for hearing that. And if you want to know more about the Enneagram, I highly recommend reading about each type at the Enneagram Institute, which I'll have a link in the description below. And I also recommend that you take a free test. There's a couple links I'll put there also that you can go to. But the Enneagram is kind of special because with all that depth of complexity, it makes testing for it very difficult. Because let's say you're in a season of stress and disintegration. I, as a 9, might take the test in that season and come back as a 6 and think I'm a 6. And vice versa, if I'm taking it in a really healthy season, it might come back as a 3. So you kind of have to read on the Enneagram Institute website is what I would recommend. All about the type and pay careful and special attention to the key motivations, the biggest fears, the basic desires of each type, because that's going to point you in the best direction. Which also brings us to the book of the week. The book of the week this week is The Sacred Enneagram by Chris Heuertz. And this book is fantastic, especially if you're just new to the Enneagram and you want to explore more. This goes very deep into, even perhaps how your type could have developed over time from things that happened in your childhood. It is extremely, extremely interesting, chock full of amazing stuff, and it's just honestly beautifully written. And it's from a Christian perspective, so for those of you who are Christian and you're interested in the Enneagram but may have heard that there's something sketchy about it, this book will help you understand that there's nothing demonic or mystical about it at all, and helps you understand it through a Christian lens. So I highly recommend The Sacred Enneagram by Chris Heuertz. And just a side note, I know the record of the week is Wednesday, but Sleeping at Last is a band, and they have written recently a song for every Enneagram type. So there's an album with 9 songs in it, one for each type. And so if you're reading through and you think you know what your type might be, go ahead. I have a link to Spotify and Apple Music for those as well, and you can just take a listen and see what see how you hear those songs and if any of them touch you in a special way. But this has been Why It's Great. It's getting late, and I'm starting to not be able to make sense anymore. So I'm actually just going to stop, and I'll see you Wednesday. Good night.